Hey, a bit of a reflection here, looking back more than a decade on two very, very important books. And it was more than a decade ago that I approached Harnish, the author of Mastering the Rockefeller Habits, the first book that brought to life the one-page plan and a lot of great work that we've done with companies over the years. And I was a Gazelles coach back then, and I approached Vern and said, "Hey, he had totally updated the tools. There was all kinds of other great learnings and insights from the original Rockefeller Habits book that wasn't fully represented in the book because all that innovation and iteration hadn't been shared in, or at least in a new published format." And I approached him with the idea of saying, "Hey, we should update it and build a current version of it, freshen it up." And working title was the Rockefeller Habits Implementation Guide, which ultimately ended up in this thing called Scaling Up, which is very thorough and robust and helpful. And the root of it, is I went and interviewed 50 CEOs who had been using the framework for a long time in their business and seen great success. I mean, those interviews were awesome. The learnings that I had from those 50 interviews. I remember at one point Vern said, "Hey, have I ruined you yet?" And I go, "What do you mean ruined me?" They go, "Well, do you have endless stories and you can't stop from telling them continually?" I go, "Well, in that case, yeah." I mean, these CEOs were so insightful and sharing their learnings and their lessons and different tools and techniques and approaches. And from that became a lot of the input into the Scaling Up book. And so, kind of looking back more than a decade, I was thinking about it the other day. I go, there was a lot of improvements that went into that book over the initial Scaling Up or initial Rockefeller Habits, pardon me, framework. But now another decade later, like, well, there's a whole bunch of other learnings and insights that I thought I'd share, at least from my perspective and our firm's perspective, because there's a dozen of us now using these tools with clients almost every single week. And what do we learn? What do we see different? So I thought I'd share a couple of insights, and you can read more about it in the attached article if you want. But there's two real big lessons. The framework is outstanding and simple and incredibly powerful, but getting it right is hard. It's almost like an amazing high-powered race car. It'll do all kinds of amazing things, but if you don't know how to drive it, maintain it, or you don't know the course that you're on very well, it can turn into a handful really, really fast. So it's incredibly powerful, but getting it right is rare. And when we look at plans that people come up with, regularly we see good intent, but it's really hard to nail it and get it right. And that's both in terms of the strategy, getting the strategy right, and then two, getting enough clarity for the execution so that the team can just run and do great high value work in the end, assuming that they're highly accountable. Second thing is, once that strategy clicks, and it's a beautiful thing when that strategy clicks, particularly when you take a combination of the hedgehog and the BHAG and the flywheel and you put it together and you nail the 3-year plan. You got a clear P&L and your growth strategy to get there. Once it clicks, it's an execution game and you can't help but be successful. It's very much a can't help but, which is a piece of the flywheel and Collins's work. But it's really clear that it's not just about the execution piece, which is important, but it's also about this learning and iteration engine. And when you learn every month and every 90 days, and from that accountability that you create, you learn, it improves this or iterates the strategy, and it improves and iterates the execution. It also might improve and iterate the team or the composition of the members of your team. Super, super key. So if we look at that with those two major insights, it's hard, but when it works, wow, is it amazing. Um, what have we done with that general base level framework and added to it? We definitely used a lot more Collins's tools. We've done a lot of work using his particularly hedgehog and flywheel and bringing that to life and making that more the centerpiece of the focus of the strategy. Because if you power that thing up, away you go. Secondly, the people development and enhancing the strength of the team. We've tried to make it more of a system and a discipline that we drive rigorously to continue to help our high performers continue to thrive, and those that aren't there yet to get them into place where they're thriving, whether it's different job, different manager, different approach, or unfortunately sometimes a different company. And then we've also built in a lot of the tools from your oxygen mask first into the resilience and development of those key leaders, which I wrote that book after Scaling Up. And if we look again and again at the mistakes, so those are kind of the changes we made. But if I look at the mistakes, just zooming out again and again after looking at hundreds more plans and thousands more planning sessions. The first one is accountability. Let's assume you've got great strategy and you've got the execution piece happening. Where it falls apart is where the accountability softens or weakens, and that shows up in two different ways. One, there's not enough joy when things go well, or there's not enough tension when they don't. The joy, builds the culture, makes us feel good, keeps us motivated. The tension creates the learning and the improvement, and you need a good combination of those. Every culture is a bit different, but you need a really good combination of those two. But when that starts to slip, you can get yourself into trouble and things start to fade. And that's hard to keep up that level of accountability. Just a shout out to another coach that I got to know years ago, Dave Bainey. Dave said he had a very simple question for accountability when someone didn't achieve something. Okay, was it bad strategy or was it bad execution? There's not a third option. Either the strategy, the approach wasn't right, or the execution or the relentless execution wasn't right. So the first big mistake is letting accountability fade or lose its sharpness. By the way, another indicator is the goals start to get mushy and aren't smart. And the indication they aren't smart is there's not a number in them of some sort or some measure, which we built some other tools to help people sharpen up the smart version of the goal. You would think that's straightforward, basic. We all know it, but keeping those goals sharp and meaningful, that's a challenge. But the second thing that I've seen again, well, because basically growth is the imperative of a lot of companies, but why sometimes doesn't it work? And the other major piece that we've seen again and again and again is because it's really obvious someone isn't going to be able to make it work in their role, and the tough calls aren't happening. And whether that's giving tough direct feedback or it's making a change with that person's responsibilities within the organization. And when those things fester, they end up becoming very expensive lessons for the business and for the CEO and executive team. So, and if we look from now, what is different? The other piece is in the next book I have coming out calling The Four Forces of Growth, which helps on this sharpening of the strategy and picking the right execution goals perspective. In the book, we just talk about how a lot of times people get spatial disorientation like pilots do. You hear more about it later. But where people are working basically really, really hard on the wrong things, and then they lose their momentum. And when that happens with an airplane, that's a serious problem. When it happens in our business, it really hurts the enterprise, and it's hard on the people because they're working harder but getting less results or declining results. So that's a layer that we add on top to help people to improve the quality of their strategic thinking and self-evaluate and self-correct. A couple other things that just in terms of things to do that really seem to matter, and I keep getting clearer and more focused on this, is focus on the couple of things. Like in my new book, I talk about the 3 big moves. Ideally 2 if you could, but 3 is doable. But that is a really important thing. What are the couple things that matter most? And usually you should be able to prove it out with mathematics. If you can't show me with numbers why those couple of things matter most, then they maybe don't. And again, I mean, prove it with numbers, not just present it with numbers, but prove it in a way that's compelling and convincing. It should be logical. And then getting a guide. I mean, look, I ended up building a firm. I never planned to build a firm. That was never my plan. And now there's 12 of us, and we're growing like crazy and adding a few people every year. But get someone who is a master of this to help. It makes a difference. Experience makes a difference. Today we had our internal afternoon. We have an afternoon of development once a month, and a day 3 to 4 times a year of development, plus our annual retreat. And it's all just learning from each other to master our craft, because it looks simple, but it's complicated. So a master that knows. So the thought I leave you with is that, if you just take a look at the value of scaling up, it's incredibly valuable. And you likely could get stronger on the strategy piece, figuring out where you're creating a compelling competitive advantage for the long term and building the power of your flywheel. Or it might be around the execution piece on the quarterly goals and iterations and accountability and learning. And it could be around that same accountability iteration wheel with your people. So think about that. Where do you think you'd add the most value in your organization by dialing in? At the end of the day, the basic, I was going to say your oxygen mask first. Mastering Rockefeller habits, foundational getting started guide, scaling up the deeper, updated, more implementation focus. But the tools are outstanding. The question is, are you extracting the value out of them? And then if not, what's the next piece that you might master next? What's the next habit, next discipline, next piece? Anyways, I wanted to share those updates and hope that's helpful. See you soon.